Welcome back to another video. With all of the Watches and Wonders releases being covered, pretty extensively, I figured let's talk about something a little different in this video. The individual watches have been covered to great extent, but I wanted to look at, a certain type of watch movement that was really popular at this Watches and Wonders and has been picking up a lot of popularity over the past couple of years. Now, automatic watches are known for the really smooth movement of the hands, especially the second hand that people say it sweeps. It doesn't really sweep. There's just a really quick release in the escapement that allows it to move along very quickly. And that sort of makes it look like it's sweeping. Now, there's another type of mechanical movement that allows the hands or the hour markers to actually jump from position to position. And in between, it'll actually stay still. This movement is known as a jumping hours, where the hour marker, whether it's a hand or a disc, will stay on the hour for the entirety of that hour, and then once it's time to roll over, it will jump to the next hour. So during the whole hour, it stays at the same point. Although it sounds simple, this is actually a complex mechanism that requires a lot of energy. And for the most part, watchmakers don't want to use the mainspring to power this jump. So they'll often give it a second power source to give it that, because if you're using the mainspring and the escapement for that, it can often decrease the accuracy of the watch and affect the power reserve. So by giving its own power source, you kind of eliminate those problems. It's also common for not just the hour hand or the hour marker to have this. It's very common to see the hands have this too. Now, it does add a whole layer of complexity because now you have another movement that needs this energy to jump it along. So what you'll also commonly see is that the hour marker is a jumping function and the hands will rotate around, or they'll be on a 5-minute marker interval where they jump every 5 minutes. However, it's much simpler to just have the hours jumping and lead the rest of the movement. This allows you to keep the movement thinner as well. So why did anyone make this movement in the first place, and where did it actually come from? Well, there's different theories out there, but the first notion that I could find was from 1656, when the Campani brothers designed a clock for Pope Alexander VII, and it had what we would call a digital display, where, again, it was an analog movement that had the numbers for the hours and the minutes, so it read like a digital clock, where the digits were displayed rather than the hands pointing at a number. And around 1700, we get the first known example of a jump hours pocket watch. It was created by the Eckhart of Freiburg and marked a big step forward in watchmaking. Another significant example came around 1830, when French watchmaker Blondeau makes a jump hours movement for Louis Philippe I. He was the King of France, and this was sort of the start of his reign to mark this, monumental moment. But it wasn't until 1883 when the first patented jump hours movement came about. And this was by Austrian watchmaker Joseph Paulweber. He then licensed the movement design to brands like IWC at the time, and then they were able to create jump hour watches with his movement and sell them. Now, you're probably wondering, why are these movements relevant today, and why would we go to the trouble to make these movements? Well, the practical reason is that reading a digital display can be easier. And even if it's just an hour marker that jumps from hour to hour, that hour hand is still easier to read. The other reason is it allows you to create a very different way to not only tell time, but to create watches. One of the most common ways that we've seen is with the hour and the minutes on rotating discs, and windows that are cut into the face allow you to see what time it is, and that's what gives you that digital display. This is called a guichet. It's a French word that means a type of window. The other part of this, which ties into their popularity today, is that customers are always looking for something new, unique, and better. And watchmakers are always striving to make their movements more unique, more efficient, and just better overall. Now, in today's world where mechanical watches aren't a necessity, and we have lots of time-telling devices, watches are typically purchased for the passion and appreciation of the watch and watchmaking itself, or for flexing it, depending on the person, but consumers are constantly looking for something new and creative to keep that passion and the interest exciting. And with such a large number and variety of watches to choose from on the market today, we've seen brands do some really interesting things lately to try to stand out and make themselves unique, from coming up with their own medals or crazy faces that you wouldn't typically see or limited editions that are only going to be around for a little bit of time, anything to sort of keep consumers excited and interested in the market. But less often do we see brands release a fundamentally different way to tell time. And this is usually left to the niche brands like MB&F, Urwerk, Resance, Grubel Forsey, and such other brands that stand out by differentiating the way users actually interact with the watch and are functionally different. Now, I'm not suggesting that every brand is going to come out with a watch that looks like those really unique brands, but I do think that the mainstream watch market is taking more and more inspiration from these niche creative brands and bringing it to the mainstream. And recently we talked about Cartier being at the forefront of this sort of square watch trend that's going on. And it turns out they're actually really helping to lead the charge on this jump hours trend as well. Now, back to the inception of the movement. Although some brands were starting to sell jump hour watches under this licensed patent that they had, they really didn't see a lot of popularity until after World War I, where the Art Deco movement came in and we started to see these really strong lines and very defined architectural language. And it was at this point that Cartier created one of the most sought after vintage watches, the Tank à Guichet. It's got this incredibly unique closed off face, except for the hour and minute windows. It's really unique among traditional round watches. But Cartier weren't the only company to do this. Around the same time, Rolex had created a very similar design, and it was known as the Marconi jump hours. But Rolex's design was unique in that it had a third window showing the seconds. And this is helpful for actually knowing if the movement was working or not. Can you say hi? And as popular as the Tank à Guichet was and continues to be, there's only ever a very few amount that were ever produced, and they were only for VIPs of the brand. You couldn't just get one as a regular customer. Throughout the decades since the inception of the Tank à Guichet, Cartier have re-released it a few times. Now, they've only ever been in, again, limited releases where you might get 100 of a certain variation, and they've only ever been for, the top clientele. For example, in 1996, Cartier released 6 of them, and in more recent years, like 2004, 2005, they released around 100. And that was actually the last time that Cartier had done a release of the Guichet until this year. And this is why when the rumor mill started going before Watches and Wonders that Cartier was going to re-release a new version of the Tank Guichet, people got really excited. And sure enough, as Watches and Wonders came out this year, one of the first releases that sort of took social media by storm was the re-release of the latest batch of the Tank à Guichet. And they managed to catch a lot of attention in doing so. Now, these new versions look very similar to the original ones and pay homage to sort of all of the Tank Guichets that have been released, but they also released a new version this year where the hour and the minute windows are offset, and this is unofficially being called the oblique. As you can imagine, for this oblique Tank à Guichet, it's a very limited edition run. There's only 200 being made, and again, they're only going to be offered to the top clientele. I'm sure we'll start to see them on the open market soon enough though. For the regular release, Cartier haven't released numbers around how many they're releasing, but I can imagine it is still a limited run, and they are also going to be really, really hard to get your hands on. But Cartier weren't the only brand to release a jumping hours watch this year. We also saw Bremont release 2 versions of a jumping hours watch under their Terra Nova line. One's a limited edition. It comes in full bronze. It's very similar to the classic jumping hours with a closed face with your hour marker and window marker windows cut out. And then one's a non-limited edition that combines a traditional watch face. It's got a second hand, but it also has a minute and hour window cut into it. I quite like this version of the Terra Nova. I think it's really clean and unique. And Bremont hasn't been a brand that I followed closely. It hasn't been one that I've really been that interested in, but honestly, seeing this new Terra Nova, I really want to get my hands on it and try it on, so I will be doing that soon. Now, this is really cool. JLC also released a version of the Reverso, and one side of it has a jumping hours window display along with a moon phase, and I have to say, I think this is one of my favorite releases that I've seen recently, and I feel like it deserved a lot more praise at Watches and Wonders than it got, or maybe I just missed it. But especially as this is the year of the jumping hours, I mean, this is a really cool watch. The overall sort of starry sky is really cool to begin with, but the hour window is situated in a really aesthetically pleasing sort of step down window. and it's large, it's really readable. And the minute window that's cut out like a smile, I think that's got really nice readability. Just all of the proportions and the layout of this, I think, are perfect. This is what JLC is really good at. I mean, they perfected this reverso design. They just keep putting out designs for this that are, in my opinion, really, really stunning. And again, I think this went under the radar. And if you are looking to get one, maybe the lack of hype can make it a little bit easier to get one. One of the other jump hour watches that we saw released this year was a collaboration between a prominent watch dealer and social media watch personality, Nico Leonard. He teamed up with the watch brand Main to release a tonneau-shaped jumping hours with a more classic minute and hour window style cutout. And I think it looks quite good. It's not high watchmaking, so it's tough to compare it to something like the JLC that we just looked at. You know, they're in very, very different price ranges, obviously. And for the price point that this is at, I think it's a great looking watch. My one criticism from not having actually seen it in person, I'm just judging off pictures, so it's always hard to tell. But again, from the pictures, I would say that the sort of legibility of the hour and the minute windows looks a little bit tough. They look a little bit small, but can't fully judge that until I actually get to see it in person. Now, over the past couple of years, outside of Watches and Wonders, we've seen brands quietly releasing their own versions of jumping hours watches. The Frank Muller Crazy Hours, where it's a jump hours, but the hours aren't in sequential orders. So the hour hand has to jump all over the place. It is actually, as the name implies, quite a crazy design. And it actually played an important part in bringing the jump hour movement function back to the forefront of mainstream watchmaking. We've seen IWC with their tribute to Paul Weber, which was the gentleman we talked about earlier, who had patented the first design for wristwatches and licensed it to IWC, which I think is, it's quite a cool story there. And then we had Louis Vuitton with the Timbre Convergence, which isn't actually a true jumping hours, as the hours don't really jump. They just made it look like one, so the hours still just rotate around. But again, it still looks like that design style. Some other examples of jump hour watches that have been released lately are the DB28 Digital from De Bethune. Otsuka released the gorgeous low-tech number 7.5. Chopard launched the LUC Quattro Spirit 25, and there have been many, many others from all sorts of brands, but these are a few that I picked out that I thought were quite interesting. Another one that I didn't know about until doing some research for this video was actually that EP had played around with a jumping hours watch, and they took it a step further and actually put a minute repeater into the jumping hours movement, which is quite cool. However, there's one watch that solidified itself in horological history, and it's the A. Lange & Söhne Zeitwerk. It's one of the most stunning examples of a digital display that utilizes both a jump hours and a jump minutes function. I mean, look at that. It's just stunning. Now, A. Lange & Söhne say that the inspiration for the Zeitwerk came from a project in 1814 at the Dresden Semperoper Opera House. Hopefully I've said that correctly, where Ferdinand A. Lange helped to create a digital display with jump minutes on a wall clock. Now, the Zeitwerk comes in 3 different versions. There's a no date, a date, and then a minute repeater version. Now, this could be considered the pinnacle of watchmaking. To not only have a jump hours, but also a minute repeater in the same watch is incredible. The complexity of not only the movement, but the case design to create that sound is something that you would only expect from a brand like A. Lange & Söhne. Not anybody could produce a watch like this. I truly think it's one of the most impressive watches on the market, and not only just for the complexity of it, but for the design. It's truly beautiful. As expected, none of the versions of the Zeitwerk come at a low price point, unfortunately, and if you're looking at the minute repeater, that's going to cost you the same as an average sized home, if you're even given the opportunity to buy one. Now, I think it's great that watch brands are starting to come out with more unique ways to tell time and just different ways to interact with our watches in general, and rather than just making another dive watch that's an off-brand sub-mirror. Reaching back into the past and creating more modern designs from historical models is nothing new, but I hope brands continue to find inspiration from these historical horological designs and creations and bring them into the future and make them new again. What do you think? Have you previously bought a jump hours watch, or are you starting to consider buying one now with all these new releases? If so, what's catching your eye? Let me know down below in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.